Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are covering the first issue of Sword. Now, I'm not really sure what direction this is all going to go in, and the reality is there's so much happening in X, or not really even X of Swords, in Dawn of X already. This might be one of the stories that we do where we only really cover it in volumes, right? So we'll cover this first issue, and then we won't really cover it again until we pick up with until it concludes with the first arc, and then we'll cover all the rest of it, you know, and kind of call it like a conclusion or part 2 or whatever it is. But I do think it's important to establish that this is here, because what this is doing is it's moving the whole idea of Krakoa and the mutant population beyond Earth and focusing more on the stars. Now, the funny thing about this is that this is written by Al Ewing, and in recent years, Al Ewing has kind of become the new Dan Abnett, right? For those of you guys who don't know what that means, for years leading up to like 2006, when I say years, I mean like decades, Marvel's whole, I guess, space escapades, their space opera, was usually sort of hit by different people here and there, but it was never really cohesive, right? So you go back and you read the old Jim Starlin Warlock stories, or the old Jim Starlin Thanos Silver Surfer stories, then you see a lot of spacefaring escapades there. You had stories involving Wendell Vaughn as Quasar, you had stories involving Captain Marvel himself, right? Marvel of the Kree, but you didn't really have any kind of cohesiveness there. You had story arcs, right? So you had like Infinity War or Infinity Gauntlet or the Infinity Crusade or something like that. But in 2006, Dan Abnett basically took the entirety of everything going on in space and Marvel and consolidated all of it down into a story called Annihilation. And Annihilation led into Annihilation Conquest, which led into this great big huge expansion of all the spacefaring operas that Marvel had going on. So that's why you saw stories like Rise and Fall of the Shi'ar Empire, where Vulcan, who was the third Summers brother in Omega level mutant, left Earth and took over the Shi'ar Empire. Then you had the War of Kings, Realm of Kings, different things like that. But Al Ewing, in a lot of ways, seems to be the guy that Marvel turns to for writing things that have to do with space. But what I also want to do here is offer a bit of exposition in terms of Sword. So Sword is this organization that was created by Joss Whedon back in Astonishing X-Men, really Joss Whedon and John Cassaday back with Astonishing X-Men and the Return of Colossus. But the whole purpose behind this is that if S.H.I.E.L.D. monitors threats on Earth, then Sword monitors threats to space. And so it basically stands for the Sentient World Observation and Response Directorate. And the whole purpose is to just monitor threats that are out there that are potential threats to Earth, but also stand as a kind of ambassador, right? So if there were a great big huge coming together of all the different alien races that exist out there in Marvel Comics, then Abigail Brand would represent the solar system, right? So you'd have like a representative for the Shi'ar and a representative for the Kree and a representative for the Skrulls, or really the Kree and the Skrulls now because they've joined forces, but all the different alien races that are out there. And then Abigail Brand would represent humanity in the Sol system, right? In the Milky Way galaxy. The idea behind Sword is that for a long time, it was cool. It had some okay moments here and there, but during the incursions, right? During Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, and in the aftermath of that Sword was effectively rebranded into what became the Alpha Flight Directorate, or Alpha Flight Program, or whatever you want to call it, with Carol Danvers running the show. This was an attempt by Marvel to elevate the popularity of Carol Danvers. It didn't really work. The story just really wasn't that great, and it just really wasn't written all that well. And so that kind of lasted until the Empire event that we recently saw conclude, that we didn't finish because it sucked. But what you ended up getting is this segment whereby Abigail Brand basically quit the Alpha Flight program. And the reason why is because Alpha Flight was a reactionary organization. They would wait till a threat got there and then they would react. That and the fact that the superheroes would never give any information to the Alpha Flight program, because Sword's success came in the fact that Sword could tap into all the information available to S.H.I.E.L.D. and like the NSA and the FBI and the CIA and even the various other superhero groups that would all funnel information to Sword to basically say, hey, look, like I summoned Galactus, he's going to be stopping by, right? So like, he's not going to be a threat. Just FYI, don't shoot him with your big lasers, otherwise he'll kill us all. Like that was kind of what like the Fantastic Four would do, or something along those lines. And so because of that, well, what we basically have here is we don't really know the current state of the Alpha Flight program. It seems to still exist. I wouldn't be surprised if Marvel just kind of quietly phases it out, like it's just never really seen or heard from again. I mean, we have it referenced here, right? So it seems to exist only insofar as Abigail Brand quit. But if the Alpha Flight program still exists, then Sword has become an extension of the mutant population. Because Abigail Brand is a mutant that has the ability to speak and understand any language, similar to Cypher, but it's kind of like an alien language, just not every language in existence ever, then what this basically means is that Sword operates on behalf of Krakoa. And that's why this opens up with Magneto showing up here. Because Sword, now operating as an extension of Krakoa, kind of falls under the purview of Krakoa. And that's why Abigail Brand being here, she's being returned as the leader of Sword, right? Because she was originally the leader when the group was first introduced by Joss Sweden, and it was really kind of a return to familiarity, right? She's right back where she belongs, more or less. Now, for Cable's part, in the aftermath of the Ten of Swords event, he's actually been elevated to the Chief of Security for S.W.O.R.D. But the funny thing about this is that a lot of people, and even with Magneto, a lot of people don't really fully grasp the power of Magneto. And it's one of these things where whenever you see him use his abilities, you don't usually see him do it on like a broad scale, right? You don't really see him do like some crazy, super ridiculous thing. It's usually something like small or nuanced, or maybe some kind of interesting set of circumstances. But Cable's mind is totally blown while he's talking to Magneto, and Magneto is having this conversation and talking about the whole basis behind like the S.W.O.R.D. peak is what it's called, kind of the base of operations for S.W.O.R.D. It's called the peak. While it's called that, while we're having this discussion and all that kind of stuff, Magneto basically takes this 10,000 ton space station and changes it and like moves it and puts it in a place more in line with where Krakoa believes it should be. He's just doing it as an arbitrary thing. Like he's literally doing multiple things at the same time, right? So like where you may find yourself doing something where like you aimlessly play with something in your hands, right? Or you might tap a pencil while you talk. Imagine instead of tapping that pencil, having a conversation and then thinking about a few things at the same time, you're moving a 10,000 ton space station across space. That's basically Magneto. Now we have seen him do crazy things like that, right? Like we've seen him pull like a bullet from Shi'ar space, right? Just yank it towards Earth or something along those lines. I think Kitty Pryde was inside. I don't remember off the top of my head. We've seen some crazy demonstrations of his power, and this is yet another one, right? It's just been a while since we've seen that. But that's the thing, like Magneto's power is extreme, right? It's crazy how powerful he is. And that's why I've always advocated for the idea that while I don't know if it's explicitly been stated, I don't remember if Jonathan Hickman modified this when he listed the new Omega level mutants in Marvel Comics, but Magneto, if he's not listed already, needs to be one, right? He's just that damn powerful. Now from there, Magneto basically gets a tour of where things stand with the S.W.O.R.D. space station itself. And we actually end up picking up with a guy by the name of Takeshi Matsuya, right? Takeshi Matsuya, this guy is old school, right? So he originally appeared back in the old Exterminator comics, really the Exterminators, in 1988, and he's been around for a long, long time. I think his biggest claim to fame really came when he served on Generation X, so like Emma Frost's own X-Men team back in the day, where Emma Frost started out as a villain and she had her Hellions team. Eventually the Hellions were destroyed and she ended up allying herself with Charles Xavier and then led Generation X as her own personal X-Men team, like her own personal New Mutants, more or less. Takeshi is one of these guys where he can basically kind of control and really manipulate things that are part of a machine. But the way that Marvel explains this is not just in technological fashion, right? So it's not like he's a Tony Stark type character. That's really his mutant power. He basically, anything that works as part of a greater cohesive unit is considered to be part of a machine, right? So if you had like 6 mutants, all of whose powers complemented themselves, then Takeshi could basically use his mutant powers and find the most optimal way for those mutant powers to work in unison. That's kind of how his whole thing works. So biotechnology, human technology, any form of technology, he can effectively manipulate. So his powers are pretty extreme because it goes beyond just like, I can understand how this robot works and I can reverse engineer Iron Man's armor. And it moves way beyond that, right? So if you put him, I would wager that if you put him in charge of the Avengers or even just the X-Men, right? If like the X-Men had to go to war, they would probably end up hitting up Takeshi and saying, here's our roster. How would these mutant powers best work together? And he's like, well, I mean, because you guys are working as kind of a well-oiled machine, so to speak, then this guy should do this and she should do that and they should do this. And like these 4 people should fight together and those 6 people should fight together and that kind of a thing. Now, we don't know the full depths of it, the full brunt of it. Marvel never really bothered to explain the full depths of what Takeshi was capable of. We'll probably end up seeing that over time. But again, he's kind of the guy that's sort of helping to keep the space station together. He kind of works as the control center, so like the brain of the space station, more or less. But we kind of get this continued bit of an explanation, right? This continued bit of a tour with everything going on. And that's when Abigail Brand really kind of hits on the big reason why she left Alpha Flight. And the big explanation given here is really kind of what we've already reiterated, that with Alpha Flight, they never really had the resources to do what they wanted to do, right? That Alpha Flight was a publicly available government-sanctioned superhero, or really I guess a space station kind of program, but they never really had the right resources. Back in the day, S.H.I.E.L.D. had a blank paycheck. They had whatever they needed to do to achieve anything at any point in time. It's what made the old school Nick Fury such a dangerous guy, as he could tap into any database. He had all the money in the world. Nobody would ever really say no to him. And so because of that, they could achieve virtually anything. S.W.O.R.D. had that when Abigail Brand was initially running it when it first popped up. But when it became Alpha Flight, then suddenly there were just massive limitations on it and it couldn't really fulfill its charter. And so once she's retaken over everything, she kind of came to this realization that the universe is in a lot of ways facing some pretty dire threats. She doesn't go as far as to say it directly, but basically Null is heading towards Earth. So we know that like S.W.O.R.D. #1 takes place before the events of King in Black. There's like various, alien races out there that are warring against each other that could destabilize stabilize galactic peace. So while SWORD isn't necessarily the, universe's police force, the purpose of SWORD is to monitor threats out there and to try to bring those threats to an end, if for no other reason than to keep Earth protected, right? So like what we saw with the original Kree-Skrull War. Now the Kree and the Skrull went to war against one another, and while they were races that have been warring for millions of years and had virtually nothing to do with Earth outside of the Kree creating Inhumans on Earth, that when the conflict came close enough to Earth, that it actually threatened the Earth itself. And so the purpose of SWORD is to say, look, yes, they're warring empires that are out there. They'll probably never come here, but it's entirely possible that they could. And because they could, we need to get involved in order to kind of bring things to an end. So they're indirectly kind of responsible in that way. The next person that we actually end up seeing here is a person by the name of Frenzy. And Frenzy, if I remember correctly, Frenzy has indestructible skin and super strength, but she is a character that's really old school. She's been around for a very long time. Kind of a fun fact, she was actually working for Apocalypse when he first showed up in Marvel Comics in the old X-Factor stories under Walter and Louis Simonson. So she goes way back, right? But Frenzy is a powerhouse, right? She's kind of the muscle of the team, right? She's the muscle of the six, as they call them. But that's what we kind of get, right? Each of these individuals here offers something unique to the peak in such a way to where they can be utilized, or it can utilize itself at its full capacity. And all that whole structure and formation really seems to be done by way of the efforts of Takeshi, right? Kind of working together and saying, look, these are the other 5 people that I need to do these particular things that can, basically help this thing operate in its peak capacity. Now, what SWORD actually does is not really just monitoring space. They have a much bigger charter going on, and we'll find out what that is here in a second, because what you end up getting is this kind of group sort of coming together, and a mission effectively getting ready to take off, right? A mission getting ready to happen, and everybody, traveling to what's called the launch pad or the jump suite, where they basically teleport. But we actually get 2 familiar faces here. Any of you guys who have been reading Marvel Comics for, I would say, the better part of 20 some odd years, you're going to see a couple faces here that are old school that you probably recall. The first one is Peeper, and I didn't initially realize that Peeper had come back. It wasn't until I was in the Discord talking to you guys for the weekly Q&A that I do every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Shameless plug. But I was in the Q&A session talking to you guys, answering your questions, and one of you guys asked me about SWORD, and you said that Peeper came back. So Peeper is one of the old school, I mean like OG, double OG Brotherhood of Evil Mutants guys. I think he was part of the original Brotherhood of Evil Mutants with Magneto, if not the original, then the second iteration. But he's super old school. They've been around for a very long time, and they had been friends for a very long time. Now, the fact that Peeper's back, of course, Magneto greets him as an old friend, is like, dude, I had no idea that you were on this. We need to get back together, man. Like, we need to hang out. We'll grab a beer and like we'll chit chat and talk about all kinds of stuff. But the funny thing is that Fabian Cortez is left out of all of that. Now, Fabian Cortez was part of the Acolytes, right? Back in the 1990s, when you got X-Men Volume 2 and the kind of relaunch under Chris Claremont, Jim Lee, and then eventually Scott Lobdell and a few other people once Jim Lee and Chris Claremont left. But the Acolytes were like these people who worshipped Magneto, right? Like they basically did almost every single bidding that he could possibly ask for. Fabian Cortez had the ability to augment the powers of other people, but he was by no means like a major player. The funny thing about that, if I remember correctly, because sometimes I get the TV show and the comics switched, but I believe Fabian Cortez tried to topple Magneto. But whatever it is, Magneto doesn't really remember his name. He's like, I remember the ponytail, but the name escapes me. So Fabian Cortez was never really that important to him in the first place. And so it leaves a little bit of room for jealousy. I doubt we'll actually see that. But at that point, the mission begins to commence. And these guys are dressing these wild looking spacesuits because they're not traveling out into space. They're actually breaking the dimensional barrier, and they're traveling to 3 different locations. Now, these 3 different locations here are represented by what's called the Far Shore, the Land of Couldn't Be, Shouldn't Be, and the White Hot Room. Now, the White Hot Room, a lot of you guys already know, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. The Far Shore and the Land of Couldn't Be, Shouldn't Be, those are the ones that a lot of people probably don't really know much about, right? And it stands to reason because they're very new concepts. And when I say very new, like they've been introduced in the last 4 or 5 years. And so nobody's really done anything with them. Usually when it comes to like abstract ideas like that, they have to be around for something like 20 years, right? In order to actually get a general consensus of what they are, because a boatload of different writers and artists interpret them in different ways. So the Far Shore is a concept that was explained to us and really given to us during the old Ultimate line of comics by Al Ewing. So like the Ultimates with Adam Brashear and Black Panther and Spectrum and all those characters as part of All New, All Different Marvel. But we never really got a definitive explanation in terms of what it really really is. The closest explanation that we get comes at the end of the Ultimate story, when we're basically told that if you look at every universe that exists out there, every universe has its own version of like eternity or infinity or something like that. And every version of the multiverse has its own version of the multiverse eternity, the multiverse infinity. And so every time a universe dies and is reborn, the version of eternity that existed when that universe died basically ceased to exist. And when the universe is reborn, a new version of eternity is born into that new universe. And so the question becomes, if that version of eternity that died when the universe died is gone, then where does he go? Does he simply cease to exist? And for the most part, I think it's just an easier explanation to say that, right? That version of eternity ceases to exist and like a new one takes its place. But the answer that was given to us by Ewing is they go to the far shore. So like when the multiverse died during the events of Secret Wars and was reborn again, that we basically ended up getting like all those versions of the cosmic entities. So like eternity, infinity, master order, Lord Chaos, the in-betweener, that all those cosmic entities basically died. And when the multiverse was recreated by Reed Richards, that for the most part, they were brought back the way they were before. So nothing really changed. But if you look at the multiverse, the way it died when like Galen moved into the new multiverse and became Galactus, right? That transitionary period, that version of eternity from the previous multiverse, that version of infinity, all those different cosmic entities from all those different universes that were all wiped out, when that multiverse collapsed, they all went to the far shore. Now, what they do when they're there, we don't know. Maybe they sit around all day and watch Golden Girls. Maybe they play ping pong. Who knows? Maybe they watch my videos. I have no earthly clue. We really don't know what it is that they do. We're never really given an answer, right? It's just kind of, it's basically a place where they go when they quote unquote pass on, right? When they basically die and go on to whatever awaits them next. And so from there, you go into what's called the Land of Couldn't Be, Shouldn't Be. Now, the Land of Couldn't Be, Shouldn't Be is basically a kind of dimension or space that represents every conceivable possibility that has not come to fruition yet, right? So let's make this tangible, because I know this is kind of wild. Let's say that you have a plate of like cookies sitting next to you. You have a chocolate chip cookie, you have a sugar cookie, and you have an oatmeal raisin cookie. I don't know why anybody would eat that. Now, there's a possibility, all those possibilities exist, right? There's a possibility that you could eat the chocolate chip cookie. There's a possibility you could eat the sugar cookie, and there's a possibility you could eat the oatmeal raisin cookie. But until you do, those are only possibilities, right? They're only options that exist out there. They haven't come to fruition yet. And so that's what that whole kind of dimensional place answers, right? If these possibilities exist, then where do those possibilities come from? Now, the reality is that this is adding a level of complexity to something that doesn't need that level of complexity. We don't need a dimension to represent all the possibilities that could exist in Marvel Comics, right? We can just call that imagination and be done with it, right? That's all it is. That's all it really needs to be. But Marvel likes to assign dimensional spaces and cosmic entities to different ideologies for whatever reason that only makes sense to themselves. And so the Land of Couldn't Be, Shouldn't Be represents those three cookies sitting on those plates. Now, let's say, for example, that you decide to eat that chocolate chip cookie, then that becomes a reality, right? You now live in a universe where you ate that chocolate chip cookie. There is an alternate reality out there where you ate the oatmeal raisin cookie, and there's an alternate reality where you ate the sugar cookie, right? Like there are now alternate realities for those, because with that situation being there, the very fact that you chose to eat a cookie means now you chose to eat all the other cookies, or you chose to eat none of them. I know it's really weird and it's really wild and metatextual, and that's why I say not everything that can exist needs to exist. Not every idea that somebody comes up with needs to actually be put in comic books. So if you find yourself a little confused, just kind of sit on that for a little while and just kind of ponder it, and then it'll eventually make sense to you after a while. But from there, they finally managed to make their way into the white hot room, right? And access something called the Mysterium Tremendum. Don't know what that is, where it's the first time that we saw it. This stuff's kind of cool. It seems a little unnecessary. And that's why I say like, it's an awesome concept, but it's really kind of running, like just throwing in too much wild stuff too fast. But again, it could all make sense by the time we get to the next issue. Whatever this is though, this basically kind of seems to be a cosmic, an elemental cosmic heart, right? The heart of the white hot room. Now the white hot room, for those of you guys who don't know what this is basically where you have the Phoenix Force in its full totality, right? The full power of the Phoenix Force. Now, just because a person is possessed by the Phoenix Force does not mean they can use the Phoenix Force to its full potential. That in order for that to happen, there has to be an almost almost kind of alignment between the genetic potential of the person who is a host for the Phoenix Force and the Phoenix Force itself, right? So that's why like Jean Grey is the quote unquote perfect host for the Phoenix. Someone like I think Emma Frost achieved it for a time. I believe Rachel Summers has, and I know Quentin Quire did in an alternate universe. But basically a person who's able to possess the totality of the Phoenix powers is what's called the White Phoenix of the Crown, right? That's basically what they are. A person who can achieve and use the Phoenix's abilities to their full totality. A person who achieves that level occupies and exists inside the white hot room. But we never really got a full-on explanation beyond that, right? That's old Chris Claremont stuff that was kind of revisited by Grant Morrison during his run on X-Men with Here Comes Tomorrow. But beyond that, we don't really have a full-on explanation there in terms of like what all is inside the white hot room. We're told that it's like kind of surrounded by like a lattice work, you know, and it's like a place of pure energy. But what they seem to have done here is taken the heart of the white hot room, right? This object that can kind of maintain these sort of elemental capacities. Now, what that means and what it does, I have no idea. I don't know if attaining this makes them all God. I don't know if it just allows them to tap into a level of power. Maybe it makes them super smart. We don't really know. It's one of these things where just because there's an artifact that holds a ceremonial role does not mean that artifact is going to grant a person absolute power indicative of that role, right? So this artifact resides in the white hot room. The only people who can access the white hot room are people who are able to use the Phoenix Force at 100% of its power. Ergo, anybody who has this artifact can, possesses the full totality of the Phoenix's powers. We don't know that. We're assuming that, but we don't actually have an answer for that. The result is we're just going to kind of have to wait and see what all this means. But once they attain this artifact and they bring it back, the only thing that we're really told is like, this is what comes next, right? Like this is basically what comes after all this. What that means, I have no idea, right? It's a great big huge mystery. I'm digging it. I like it. I think it's cool, and I'm excited to see what comes of it. Al Ewing almost never disappoints as a writer. I don't think I've ever read a bad story that Al Ewing wrote. So I'm excited to see, where this goes. But it is a little wild. It is a little kooky, but it leaves room for some pretty crazy events, especially because we're going cosmic in this, right? So probably a lot of involvement involving cosmic entities, different things like that. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.